So I'm pretty sure we're like more than halfway to our campsite. It's very hot. Hey guys, what's up? So I've got a slightly different one coming for you. This week I attempted a backpacking trip that did not go as planned. You can read all about it in our blog post, but I'm going to show you some clips from that, and then I kind of want to chat about like what happened, what our plans are for our next trip, and then I'm also going to talk about a book at the end of this one. And yeah, so I hope you enjoy. Here is some more gratuitous hiking footage, and I will see you after that. So as you can see, that was like a really stunning hike. I had filmed like a 2 or 3 minute breakdown of like what was in my backpack and all the stuff we brought, but I didn't want to include that in this vlog just because we didn't end up actually like setting anything up or like using it, so I don't really have any of that to like put into it. So I'll save that for our next time when we go on like a hopefully more successful trip. The reason why we didn't stay and backpack there was because we were a little bit concerned about getting out the next day. Like we were tired at that point when we turned around to go back to the truck, but we were kind of worried about like camping and then getting like not a very good night's sleep and then waking up really stiff and sore, and that would sort of be where we would get injured versus just sort of turning around. We weren't super stiff at that point, so it was fine. Honestly, it was kind of a brutal hike, like the end there. It was like the worst 4K I've ever hiked in my whole life. I was pretty much like at the limit of stuff that I could sort of deal with that day. It was nice to come home and shower and sleep in my own bed after such a hectic day. There wasn't really any particular reason we picked that hike. I guess we just didn't complete our research enough, and it ended up being first more of an incline. Like it was a 3% grade pretty much the whole way up, and then it just like didn't level out like it said it was going to, and we just didn't want to risk hurting ourselves coming out, so that was why we didn't finish it. We've already started working on what we're gonna do next, so we're hoping that it's a little bit more chill, and definitely worth going up and doing an alpine hike though. I would recommend it. We ran into this couple that had run out of water, which was kind of hectic, so they found us when we were like filtering water to fill up our hydration bags at the stream, and ended up filling up their water, and they looked rough, so like hopefully they made it out okay. So the next segment I'm going to have up here for you is a book review. I had another one filmed and it was like almost 15 minutes long with like a very detailed breakdown of the whole book, but it ended up just kind of feeling like a book report and not really what I was going for. So I just want to give you a quick chat about this. Yeah, I have some quotes for you, sort of a breakdown of the ideas. I think it was a super interesting book, like one of the most interesting books about sort of like the climate crisis that I've read in a while. So I think it's definitely worth talking about, and I hope you enjoy it. Book that I want to talk about, Less is More by Jason Hickel. It was super impactful. The whole concept that he breaks down of degrowth, which I think is super interesting. I've heard the word tossed around before, and it's basically like a voluntarily scaling down of mentally harmful aspects of our economy and growing the parts that need to be grown, green infrastructure, green jobs. He really breaks down culturally, psychologically, like why that's difficult for us, and he gives like a really interesting breakdown of like the history of like how we got to a capitalist sort of economy that we have. He gives like viable solutions, which I really enjoy. So he talks about this really interesting concept of enclosure. The nobility's stabilized after like the War of the Roses and stuff. they started enclosing the land again, creating private parks, the king's lands where you couldn't hunt. And he makes the argument that this is what led to people moving into the cities, was this like forced displacement off their land, where they had to work to provide the basic necessities of life. And so then you had the beginnings of like a labor market where like the labor wasn't super valuable because there was a surplus of it. What I thought was really interesting is he also linked this to colonialism, which I think is super important. And this idea that Europe sort of developed their colonies is incorrect, and it was actually the colonies that developed them with the raw materials, the humans, and the land itself that they were using for this development of the European cities. He set up like a couple of times, and then he also talks about like colonization of the mind. And one of these really interesting philosophical things that like I read about in a number of books now, but this idea of like animism versus dualism. So like dualism is a very Western based thought process of Christian ideals of, you know, we're at the top of the food chain and the world is there to be used, like the world as a commodity, versus animism, which is like a more traditional religion for humans. The earth is sacred, we are all a part of it, and that breaks that down. He links that in a number of times. I thought that was super neat. The way he explains it is really interesting. Idea of like technology saving us is something that he brings up a lot, and I just wanted to read this quote because I thought it was really interesting. We can choose to keep shooting up the curve of exponential growth, bringing us ever closer to irreversible tipping points of ecological collapse, and hope that technology will save us. But if for some reason it doesn't work, we're in trouble. It's like jumping off a cliff while hoping someone at the bottom will figure out how to build some kind of device to catch you before you crash into the rock below. And one of the things that I've talked about on my blog a bit is this idea of like reducing our material consumption. And that's something that he thinks really very important. You can't really degrow things without reducing the amount that you're consuming. Western society is consuming at a rate much higher than other countries, and it's usually the countries where these goods are being produced that are feeling the most rapid effects of climate change. And then he talks about sort of illicit cash flows, and it gets like very deep into the whole global financial system. If you guys want to like learn more about that and like possibly be very enraged, check out the documentary Hot Money. I'm pretty sure it's on Amazon, and we'll break it down for you in a way that I found really impactful. And I might get into that in like a whole other blog post or video. It's just something that like is super interesting, but I don't understand enough to like totally articulate. His main points are the end of planned obsolescence. So like we can make things that last longer, companies choose not to, and he argues the governments need to be responsible for changing that, and I agree. There's absolutely no reason why you need to replace a major appliance every 7 years for one part. And then he makes a lot of really intense points about advertising, which I thought was kind of, we just cut advertising in general, people would stop being so incentivized to buy things. There's some facts and figures that he lists from a study from like the 90s, but the advertising is designed to manipulate your psychology, obviously. From this survey in the 90s, like 90% of CEOs believed it would be impossible to sell a product without advertising. 80% said it made it possible for people to buy things they don't need, and 51% said that advertising will induce people to things they don't even want. And this is from advertising executives. And it's true, like I watch a lot of YouTube and all that stuff, and so I see all these other people making YouTube videos that, and like there's a big trend right now with like all these like gold necklaces and stuff, and I don't wear jewelry. I have like a couple of rings and necklaces, but it's just like not something that I ever really wear, but I see it all the time, so that I'm like, oh, like that's really nice, I should buy that, like knowing full well that if I did buy it I would probably never put it on except to like film videos, and then what's the point of it? But and another super interesting thing that he laid out was this idea of usership versus ownership. So he uses an example of like a lawnmower. So instead of every single person in a community owning a lawnmower, have perhaps like a community organized area where there was tools and things like that that you could check out. And I know in Vancouver that they are doing this. There's actually a library of things, and you can go and grow power tools at no cost. I mean, you may have to like pay a fee to join the co-op or whatever it is, but I still think that's really neat. Fourth one he brings up is eliminating food waste, and this is a huge thing. I mean, there's different numbers floating around, but you know, people always like to say there's something like half of the food that's produced is thrown away. I haven't checked the veracity of that statement, but I know a lot of food is wasted just in your home and at the production level. So, I mean, that's a big thing. And there's countries like France has made it illegal to throw away groceries in a grocery store, and they have to donate it to somewhere. So I think that's really good. And he talks about like scaling down ecologically destructive industries, like perhaps we don't need to make private jets anymore, and we could like spend those resources making solar panels, that incentivizing people to be retrained in like more impactful industries. If the US started working the working hours of Europe, its energy consumption would be reduced by 20%. So I think that's interesting. And the last thing that he talks about, which I think was one of the really cool things from the book, was this like post-capitalist world, like what would that look like? Brings up the idea of like overthrow versus degrowth. So like instead of like, you know, burning everything to the ground, there is actually like a way to move forward in a way that's the safest for most people. Because like, well, it's all good and fun to joke about it. I don't want to live in Mad Max. It sounds terrible. The more equitable a society comes, like degrowth will somewhat come naturally, and if we make it a priority, more equitable and just society is the solution to pretty much all of the issues we're facing as a species right now. Sure, and people always assume that like human beings are going to always want more and strive for more and to collect more things than their neighbor. But he makes the claim that, you know, we're judging human behavior on a population that is living in distress. Like we're living in an unequal and unjust system that's built on exploitation. And I don't think that it's fair to judge human nature from that. I thought that was really neat. So I just wanted to finish off with this quote from the book. I think it's definitely some good food for thought. Let me know what you guys think about it. Let me know if you like these book review type things, if I should make like whole videos on them, or like if they should be shorter, or you don't care at all. Degrowth stands for decolonization of both lands and peoples and even our minds. It stands for the de-enclosure of the commons, the de-commodification of public goods, and the de-intensification of work and life. It stands for the de-thingification of humans and nature and the de-escalation of the ecological crisis. Degrowth begins as a process of taking less, but in the end it opens up whole vistas of possibilities. It moves us from scarcity to abundance, from extraction to regeneration, and from dominion to reciprocity, and from loneliness and separation to connection to a world that's busy with life. Ultimately, what we call the economy is our material relationship with each other and the rest of the living world. We must ask ourselves, what do we want that relationship to be like? Do we want it to be about dominion or extraction? Yeah, that was sort of my long-winded rambling way of saying like you should definitely check out this book. I think he makes an interesting points about like GDP, about growth, about sort of our economies, and some really, really interesting points about the media versus, which I think is something that we're all super aware of, but he makes some really, really radical points on it that I think are key.